twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. Did you have that yesterday? Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? So I'm a blue fly. Maybe some of you are ivy, rather more pleasant. Anyway, that is our mission. So we have to go for it. And I think we all do in the end. So Mr. Toda's troubles all changed once he'd decided to be president and was inaugurated in 1951. So if you could read on now a little bit. Okay?
I get
Because I was in torment.
yes. Because I was in torment at the time, I gave the position of General Director to Mr. Shuhei Yajima. I then courageously plunged into my own worries. I felt deeply grateful for Nichiren Daishonin's words when I awakened to the principle of lessening karmic retribution. With tears in my heart, I was also deeply appreciative of a Gosho passage from Letter to the Brothers, in which the Daishonin explained the rise of Sancho Shima in the course of practicing faith. It reads in part, "The doctrine of Ichen Sanzen revealed in the 5th volume of the Mahashikan is especially profound. If you propagate it, devils will arise without fail. Were it not for these, there would be no way of knowing that this is the true teaching." One passage from the same volume reads, "As practice progresses and understanding grows, the 3 obstacles and 4 devils emerge, vying with one another to interfere. You should be neither influenced nor frightened by them. If you fall under their influence, you will be led into the path of evil. If you are frightened by them, you will be prevented from practicing true Buddhism." This quotation not only applies to Nichiren, but also is the guide for his disciples. Reverently make this teaching your own and transmit it as an axiom of faith for future generations. I was very fortunate to experience these 2 Buddhist principles. Recently, when I was walking down the street, I clearly saw the eternal truth of the Onge Kuden passage. "The entire magnificent assembly at Eagle Peak has yet to be adjourned in the depths of my being." I was overjoyed. I resolved to stand up for Kozen Rufu as soon as I could show proof of victory in my life.
So there we are. That is part 1, and we've really taken the most important things out of it. I don't think I need talk about Sancho Shima. You've all experienced it, and I'm sure you all realize it's no good being frightened by it. I just want to mention 2 things in part 2. If you turn now to part 2, do you mind if I just go on 10 minutes? Is that all right, really? You won't be late for lunch, I promise. Right, so how can we get there? Can you guide them? That's right.
The sincere desire. It's page 12. At the end of the first paragraph, the sentence beginning, "The sincere desire of Nichiren Daishonin's disciples." Have you found it?
So this passage here, we no need to read it now. This passage here is concerning the establishment of the high sanctuary of the Daiga Honsen. That is to say, Shohondo, at the head temple Taisekaji. So all I want to point out there is that although buildings are important, as Mr. Toda says a little later on in this particular section, ultimately, or far more important, are people. So he states here, it's the people that are important first, who build their faith, and who through building their faith require buildings in order to act as a center point for their activities, of course. But people are most important, not temples or community centers. And furthermore, he then said, first should be the community centers, because that is where the people have developed their faith and now reached a point where they need them. And the temples should follow that. This is the way he looks upon it. So, of course, this is another contention at the present time with the priesthood, who have concentrated on buildings and have used huge sums of monies in order to create them, all donated by the members, whereas in fact they'd forgotten the most important point, which is the faith and the development in faith of the people, and their activities should be led by the priests as well as the lay leaders to do shakabuku and to advance the movement for Kosen Rufu. So this important point Mr. Toda strongly mentions in that passage. So to round it off, the other point I want to make clear, and possibly it'll become even clearer to you when you read part 2, is that neither you nor I is to blame for what is happening at the moment with the priesthood. I know there is a tendency for members to think, based on their understanding of Buddhism, that if there is some cause for unhappiness in their lives, they have made the cause to suffer. And that is quite correct so far as our individual lives are concerned. But that is not the case when it comes to this situation with the priesthood. The cause for what is happening now is, in fact, nothing else but the actual founding of the Soka Gakkai and Soka Gakkai International. That is the cause which has created this upheaval with the priesthood that's been going on ever since Mr. Makiguchi first started the Soka Kyoiku Gakkai before World War II. There have been continuous troubles with the priesthood through all those periods. The fact is that, of course, over hundreds of years, the purity of the priesthood had been lost in terms of Nichiren Daishonin's teachings. The importance of Kosen Rufu, their place, and the practice of Jigyo and Keita had been forgotten. This is due to history and circumstances. It's not easy to blame an individual priest, though of course one can't help feeling that what is being done by certain individual priests today is horrifying. But in fact there's been a whole historic process of the corruption of priests. We've seen it in religions in the West too. Being a good priest is not an easy job. Being a person of small desires, as the Gosho states, satisfied with what they have, is not an easy thing in this material world. But nevertheless, there are priests, people who can be such priests. And I'm sure amongst the priests today there are those who are of that frame of mind and dedication to the cause of faith. But unfortunately there is a faction in the head temple, led by the high priest, which is not only continuing their corrupt actions, but desiring to expand them. So this tendency has been happening ever since the Soka Gakkai was formed. It was the forming of the Soka Gakkai which showed up the state into which the priests had got themselves. Before that there was no comparison. Mr. Toda and Mr. Makiguchi were so pure. They practiced exactly as Nichiren Daishonin taught. But for hundreds of years before that, this had not been the case. The shoguns had deliberately corrupted the priests, for example, as I explained in that history which I put in the bulletin. Deliberately, they'd given them secular power. In other words, they'd made them in a position superior to the people who surrounded them in the villages and so on, where their local temples were sited. They had authority over them. and they don't want to give up that authority. So this is nothing new. The cause is the founding of the Soka Gakkai. This extraordinarily pure movement based absolutely on the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin, which, as Mr. Toda explains, in many cases forgotten by the priests. So I'm sure none of you, certainly not I, ever imagined that when the three powerful enemies, as they're called, appeared, it would be the priests. The last thing I thought of. So the first of those three powerful enemies are people like journalists who have great influence in society and attack the believers. The last of the three is government or people in authority persecuting the believers. The middle one is priests. As the Buddhist dictionary quotes, arrogant and cunning priests who think they have attained what they have not attained and slander the votaries of the Lotus Sutra. So, in other words, there is nothing retrograde about what is happening. The cause was the founding of the Soka Gakkai. The effect will be the purification of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism and its teachings, so that we can enter the new era of this new century to come, the most magnificent organization of faith, to fulfill the will and testament of Nichiren Daishonin, which was, and of all the Buddhas, which was to establish Kosa and never allow its flow to cease. This is our great mission in the midst of all this that's come to a head now. Our task is to keep things going until the priesthood have got themselves sorted out into a new and pure movement. People who are really dedicated to be priests. It takes special people to be priests. In the past 50 years, people have wanted to be a priest because of the money they earn. Not only in Nichiren Shoshu, but in all the Buddhist sects in Japan, and probably elsewhere in the world. Now, they have to get it right. And of course, there are great priests amongst those who exist at the moment, and definitely there are people who can come in the future and join the priesthood, who have that dedicated way that they wish to live. People who are not desirous of great material benefit, but all they want is to give their lives to other human beings. I guess we've all met probably at least one person who we could imagine might undertake that task. All right, everyone, that's really what I wanted to say, and I think I won't keep you any more. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.